Students, I welcome to you in our today's presentation from Unit 5, Transpiration, from your paper 2nd Plant Physiology. Friends, I would like to make it clear to you that today only we are going to learn about steward hypothesis or steward theory. In next lecture we will get idea about factors affecting on rate of transpiration, isn't it? Before going to get idea about steward theory, I would like to ask one question to you. Why this theory is named as a steward? Friends, actually steward is the name of the scientist who have worked, or we can say to him as a physiologist, who worked the physiology of a plant that is related with opening and closing of stomata during the transpiration, so that his work, which is accepted by the scientists from the world, that's why this theory is named as a steward theory. One thing I would like to again tell to you, students, that is nothing but we have been learning related with the transpiration. In the sense, once again we have to remember the definition, concept of transpiration. So what is transpiration? Transpiration is nothing but loss of water in the form of a water vapors through the aerial parts of plant body is known as a transpiration. Now, as already I have said to you, when and when there is a definition, that definition is to be divided into at least 2 parts or more than that of 3 to 4 parts, so as to understand exact what that words want to tell to us. Students, there is a loss of water takes place. Means what it takes place through this process, transpiration physiological process, loss of water. In which form? In water vapor. From which part of that plant? So aerial parts of the plant, in the sense the plant which is present above the soil. Friends, here you will have to keep in mind, after getting idea about that one, also we have learned the types of transpiration. The types of transpirations are that is depend upon through which actually the transpiration process takes place, isn't it? And that transpiration process, on the basis of the transpiration process through which the transpiration takes place, there are the 3 types. First one, that is a cuticle, second one lenticular, third one is so that we have learned all these things. But today we are going to learn very interesting the theory which is having a connection with the opening and closing of the stomata. In the last lecture, if you are remembering very well, we have learned K plus pump theory. But today I am very much happy to tell you this steward theory is also known as a starch sugar theory. So definitely, why this theory is known as a starch sugar theory? Starch is converted into sugar and sugar is again converted into a starch. So that's why this theory is also known as a starch sugar theory. Already I have told you history of this theory is that this theory is given by the scientist, that is the steward, isn't it? So before that one also we'll have to learn some history, some historical points about this steward theory. Friends, starch sugar interconversion theory according to Lloyd, who put forth in 1908, of a guard cell depends upon the interconversion of a starch and sugar that is supported by Loftfield in 1921. So you'll have to keep in mind, according to the scientist Lloyd, there is interconversion of a starch sugar is there, but that process, interconversion of a starch into sugar, takes place in a guard cell. And again, such a type of a interconversion or such a type of a research is supported by Loftfield in 1921. So he found that the guard cells contains a sugar during the daytime when they are open, and starch during night when they are closed. So you have to keep in mind, opening and closing of stoma aperture is controlled by actually the two most important cell, that is guard cells. That also we have learned in the last lecture related with the structure of the stomata. And that two guard cell which are surrounding, controlling the aperture or stoma of the stomata is surrounded by subsidiary cells. So guard cell structure also we have seen into that one, having a prominent nucleus, cytoplasm, again plastids into that one. So in that two guard cells actually, the interconversion, that is of a starch into sugar and sugar into again starch takes place. So such a type of a conversion, such a type of a things have been discovered, we can say that, or reported by the scientist. That is again we have to say that the Lloyd, and then supported by the Loftfield in 1921. So whenever in the guard cell there is a sugar, and in the guard cell we can find the sugar at daytime, and whenever sugar is present into the guard cell, the water enters guard cells. So endosmosis takes place in case of guard cell. Turgor pressure of the guard cell increases, and that two guard cells going away from each other, and stoma gets opened during the daytime. Opposite condition we can find at night. The sugar is converted into the starch, and we know that starch is insoluble in the water. That's why the water, whatever entered in the guard cell by the endosmosis, becomes exosmosis. So exosmosis takes place of the guard cell. Friends, you'll have to keep in mind, very interesting things have been given by Stewart in 1964. This point is most important. We have studied the history, but that history studied by Stewart, and in 1964 he has proposed another modified scheme of interconversion of a starch and sugar for the stomatal movement. For the stomatal movement and opening and closing of the stomata. Friends, as already I have said to you, this is a very much interesting theory, as we have seen before this one of the most important theory, that is K pump K plus ion pump theory, isn't it? That we have learned how, according to that scientist, K plus presence in the guard cell is responsible for opening of stomata, and whenever K plus leaves the guard cell, definitely the stoma or the stomata becomes a closed one. Here in case of the steward, no doubt already some scientists have reached up to conclusion that there is a interconversion of a starch and sugar is there, and that interconversion of a starch and sugar is responsible for opening and closing of stomach. But further study have been carried out by the scientist, that is the steward, and in 1964 proposed another modified scheme of interconversion of a starch and sugar for stomatal movement. According to steward, first of all, at daytime, starch plus phosphate takes place, and because in presence of phosphorylase enzyme, whenever pH is a 7, starch converted into glucose 1-phosphate. So 1-phosphate group attaches to the glucose molecule. But this process, conversion of a starch into glucose 1-phosphate, takes place in presence of phosphorylase enzyme, and pH is a 7. That is because of large amount of CO2 present there. Now glucose 1-phosphate again converted into glucose 6-phosphate in presence of phosphoglucomutase. In presence of phosphoglucomutase. Again glucose 6-phosphate converts into the glucose plus phosphate in presence of phosphatase enzyme. Phosphatase enzyme. So at daytime glucose is formed from the starch, but such a type of a steps are there, isn't it? Such a type of a steps are there, and because of that, final that is starch converted into a glucose, and we know that glucose is soluble in the water, and this total process takes place in the guard cell. You have to keep in mind at daytime. During daytime in the guard cell these things are going to happen, and at night time what happens actually, glucose converts into glucose 1-phosphate and in presence of hexokinase enzyme, but at that time pH is a 5. This conversion of a glucose into starch takes place at night whenever there is a pH is a 5. Glucose converted into glucose 1-phosphate, and because of phosphorylation, in presence of phosphorylase, glucose converted into starch at night time, and because of that one, starch is insoluble in the water, so the water leaves to the guard cell, and that enters the surrounded subsidiary cells. So there is no turgor pressure in the guard cell because of presence of or less amount of availability of water into that one. Finally stomata become a closed one. So very interesting. This only you have to remember the things in the sense what happens actually at daytime. At daytime starch converted into glucose 1-phosphate, and glucose 1-phosphate converted into glucose 6-phosphate, and glucose 6-phosphate converted into glucose. So this process takes place in the guard cells, and definitely because of presence of a glucose, water enters, that is endosmosis takes place at daytime, pH 7. Starch is converted into glucose. But at night time what happens actually? So here at night time glucose is converted into starch, isn't it? So definitely whenever starch is synthesized from glucose at night time, and we know that starch is insoluble in the water, so there is a no little bit we have to say that requirement of a cells requirement of a cells, and because of that one exosmosis takes place. Water leaves the guard cell, and that two guard cell becomes a flaccid and closes the stomatal aperture, and stomata become a closed one. Friends, again and again I am giving actually the information of this conversion of a sugar into starch and starch into sugar. You will have to keep in mind change in pH is also having a lot of importance, because at daytime through the stomata CO2 enters. Because of that one the pH becomes a 7. At night time definitely you will have to keep in mind guard cell leaves or stomata leaves CO2. That is not utilized by the plant at night. Only at daytime that is used in a process of a photosis. So pH, enzymes, interconversion, these things are helping in case of opening and closing of stomata. So such a type of very interesting theory given by Stewart in 1964. Modified scheme of interconversion of a starch into sugar is proposed by the Stewart, and that's why this theory is known as the Stewart theory. And friends, you have to keep in mind here today we have learned very interesting theory, that is Stewart theory. Before that one I have told you. So these things, whenever stomata get closed, definitely there is a decrease in the rate of transpiration, or because there is a no transpiration takes place through the stomata, isn't it? So this Stewart hypothesis, interconversion of transitions to glucose into the again starch, is responsible which leads the opening and closing of the stomata. This theory put forth by the scientist Stewart in 1964, my friends. So these things, a lot of before that one we have studied the history, because some scientists concluded that at daytime what happens, actually conversion of a starch into sugar takes place. At night time sugar is again interconverted into the starch, means glucose into the starch, but modified scheme of interconversion of a starch into sugar, that is glucose, is given by the scientist, that is a Stewart. And so that the whole world, plant physiologists, botany students, learning the theory for opening and closing of stomata is the Stewart theory, Stewart hypothesis. I think I have tried my level best with the help of these only 4 slides make clear to you about how actually this Stewart hypothesis takes place, which steps are there, and how the final conversion, that is starch into the glucose, takes place at daytime, and glucose into the starch at at night time takes place, and these things leads to the opening and closing of the stomata. Friends, this theory is having a lot of importance in the life of a plant, so you have to remember these things. And Friends, with this, I would like to conclude the lecture that is of our Unit 5 transpiration, and from that one we have only studied the mechanism of opening and closing, isn't it? Thank you.